Badger Politic. I'm Scott Stearns.
My name is Paul Sickle. Good evening. And we are broadcasting once again from our undisclosed location. Please tell Steve Wynn that we're totally undisclosed. That's the casino magnate to threaten Dean Heller into doing the unthinkable, voting to continue debate on a bill that will take up to 32 million people off of health care. Yes, we thought it was dead a week ago, and yes, it passed to debate today, and likely some version of it will pass on Friday morning, which, it's the 50-50 question, but my bet would be yes. On Friday morning, which will lead to a conference committee and a secretive bill and a total disaster for the American people. So there we go. Don't tell Steve Wynn we're here, because he threatened Dean Heller, and I'd hate to see what he'd do to Scott and I once he heard our seditious.
So you set the table a little bit, but yeah, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of whip counting, obviously, going on right now on the Senate floor. So anytime the Senate proceeds to a bill or wants to take up legislation on the floor, it has to do what's called a motion to proceed. That's what had to occur. They needed a majority of senators to commit to that, which they got. They got 50-50, and then our Vice President Mike Pence had to step in and cast that 51st vote to begin debate. So you had two Republican defectors, Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski out of Alaska. Mm-hmm. So they voted against proceeding to the legislation. Shelley Moore Capito, West Virginia, voted for it. Senator Dean Heller out of Nevada voted for it.
Obviously, Ron Johnson.
Ron Johnson apparently was having a lengthy discussion with Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor.
The process.
And then John McCain made his arrival, and so after he came in, cast his vote, Ron Johnson went along with that and also cast his vote. So there you had your 50-50. The other conservatives obviously went along with it: Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. Yeah. And so we're underway. They've approved basically 20 hours of debate that can take place. Some interesting footnotes. The legislation. Anytime you have a bill or an amendment come up, the clerk has to read it before the Senate, and then usually there's a unanimous consent request to dispense of the reading of the bill or amendment, and then they move on to actually doing stuff.
Sure.
But the Democrats tonight, Patty Murray stood up and said, "Nope, I will object to the dispensing of the reading." So when they voted on the Better Care Reconciliation Act as an amendment, they made the clerk read the whole thing, which took up a significant amount of the evening to get through.
Yeah. So the thing that really bothers me, well, first of all, we've heard a lot of people, and you were saying this too, talk is cheap, right?
Yep.
A lot of people, even McCain himself, but more closer to home, Ron Johnson, say they wanted a better process. They didn't want to pull the rug out from under anyone.
Yeah.
Then there's Ron Johnson spoken out of both sides of his mouth. He doesn't want to pull out the rug out from people who use Medicaid to, say, pay for autism therapy for their children.
Right.
By the same token, he also wants significant Medicaid reform. The one good thing about where things have gone with Johnson is he knows that this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And he wants to come up with, he's come up with various reasons to suggest it's not a good idea. Mm-hmm. And he knows the process isn't right.
Yeah.
The one way they can do a process that would be much more acceptable would be to go to more normal Senate order, which would wind up resulting in a bipartisan bill, given the mix, which would mean that you would actually have something that probably wouldn't be the greatest for us, but it would be tremendously better than this monstrosity that's been proposed really from the start, which is a huge tax cuts for billionaires on investment income, or if you take down that, it's big tax cuts for at least health insurance companies. It's less care, destroying probably these individual markets effectively, unless, except for high risk markets, which don't pay for anything. Also probably removing the regulations that require them to pay things, or to have things like to continue to pay over a certain maximum. Because that was always the thing with the high risk policies before Obamacare was, they could say, well, we're not going to pay until you have $5,000 in charges or $10,000. We're going to give that deductible. But then after $100,000, we're not going to pay it either.
Right. So there was a floor and a ceiling.
Right.
Essentially.
Right. It was a cap.
Or there wasn't a whole lot in between.
Right. And the thing is, the funny thing is that when you have really expensive healthcare costs, they oftentimes are the ones that balloon into the six figures. Yeah. Those are the ones that wipe you out.
Absolutely.
So basically it was a clever way to pay very little.
Yeah.
In claims. And I think these guys seem really bent at the end of the day on allowing insurance companies to pay fewer claims to more people for greater costs out of pocket, whether it be their premiums or it be, whatever their upfront costs of the health care are, because it's not supported by insurance anymore.
Yeah. Let's be honest. I mean, they want to wipe out the last 8 years of history and go back to how things were. That's basically what it is. That's why they've been so obsessed with voting on repeal, how many, 50 plus times.
But
or
it'll
whatever
actually
it was.
be worse because the takedown of Medicaid, which means that the vulnerable children's programs, programs for people with autism or therapy or long-term care for the elderly who are in nursing homes, because that's not long-term care is a Medicaid program. It's not a Medicare program.
Right.
Those kind of things are all at risk here. And do you want to walk us through the process a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's been confusing because there's so many proposals.
So it's Tuesday night, it's midnight, going
around.
into Wednesday.
Yeah.
They passed the motion to proceed.
Yeah. And then
the first thing failed, right?
Yes, and so basically the underlying bill is the House bill, and they're going to offer a number of amendments that are basically going to strike a lot of the language and then insert new text. So the Medicare Reconciliation Act was the bill that the Senate had come up with, not in committee or anything, but in secret with the 13 senators.
Right. And that one failed pretty spectacularly.
It did. It failed, actually. That was the vote this evening, and it failed 43 to 57. So
57 no votes. And they actually needed 60.
They did need 60.
They came up 17
They
short,
needed 60, and the reason for that is because it hadn't been scored by the Congressional Budget Office, and it had
not been scored.
It had not been, and the
parliamentarian said that's a no-no.
Yeah, well, Ted Cruz wanted his language inserted in there, which was about
getting rid of all your essential services, basically.
Exactly. So
not only could they have a lifetime limit on what they'll pay, they could also just decide not to pay for certain things, like childcare.
Yeah. It's all bets are
or
off,
childbirth.
right?
I'm sorry, not childcare, childbirth.
Yeah.
That's another debate. That's another unfulfilled
That's a pre-existing edition,
Trump promise is the childcare, but that's not being debated today.
So you did have you had a number of Republicans that voted against this thing tonight. So there's 52.
Read them off.
So the no votes on the BCRA, the Medicare Reconciliation Act, where Susan Collins from Maine, Bob Corker, these are all Republicans. So Susan Collins from Maine, which we knew.
Let's go through them and just say surprise or no surprise.
Bob Corker, Tennessee,
moderate surprise, although he had some reservations about how retrograde this thing is.
Tom Cotton of Arkansas. He's kind of a hothead Gen X Republican.
He's awful, but it's not. I would put it more in the moderate surprise category, moderate to somewhat surprising, just because it's such a red state.
Yeah.
But he also knows that Arkansas would get just hammered by this bill because you've got a lot of poverty there.
Exactly. Lindsey Graham, South Carolina.
That's a moderate surprise, only because he's a moderate. He's usually a party line guy, especially on like McCain is.
I wouldn't call him a moderate. I mean,
policy.
he's a conservative, but yeah, he's definitely not. He's when you talk about Donald Trump and
he's critical of Trump. Yeah. He's not in the mood to give Trump easy wins.
Yeah.
He might be one of those guys who hates Trump so much that he might just vote no, just to give us, stick in the eye to Trump.
Right.
But anyway, keep going.
Dean Heller, Nevada.
That's not a surprise because he's up for re-election in what is trending to be a blue state now.
Although he did vote for the motion to proceed, which was a critical vote.
Which is also not a surprise because the Win guys who can't know where we are because we're afraid of them threaten him daily.
Right.
The casino magnates.
Mike Lee of Utah.
That's not a huge surprise, although let's not count on him for anything down the road.
I won't count on any of the conservatives.
Right.
They're not looking out for the same interests that those that support.
Not a huge surprise. He's a right wing guy who wants extreme stuff.
He's maybe the most conservative member of the Senate. Jerry Moran from Kansas.
Not a huge surprise, just because there's half the state of Kansas is probably going to have to go to Colorado to find a hospital if these. I mean, I'm serious.
Yeah.
This is not a joke.
No.
It's a sparsely populated area, and without Medicaid support and even ACA fund, you
might have a number of these hospitals closing.
Funded clients, the closure rate in rural hospitals is supposed to be really high and very. There's not a lot of people in Western Kansas, so at least not that many people would lose care, but those that are left in Western Kansas would be really in bad shape if they needed to find a hospital. Yeah. So I'm not shocked that it was a no here.
Lisa Murkowski from Alaska.
Definitely not a surprise for some of the same reasons as Kansas. And as we said before, she's less afraid of being primaried.
No, she's a survivor. Yeah.
She did get primaried in 2010 by the Tea Party.
Yep.
Came back, ran her own write-in campaign as an independent, and immediately then affiliated back with the Republican. She defeated the Republican Tea Party person from the center in Alaska. And Alaska has a history of doing things like that.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as traditional of a red state as other similar red states are.
And then we had Rand Paul from Kentucky. So.
Rand Paul, it's that same thing with Mike Lee.
Yeah. So that's the rundown of the no votes on the Republican side for the repeal and replace bill as it was introduced via an amendment in the Senate tonight.
So tomorrow, what happens?
So tomorrow there'll be more debate. They've got 20 hours. So we've got a number of.
I read they were going to vote on straight repeal tomorrow.
I think that's
without
next,
replacement.
I think that is next up.
Which is expected to fail because several of those people will vote.
Yeah, some of those same people will vote against, and some of those no votes will change. I think you'll gain. Mike Lee, Rand Paul will probably switch to yes because they could care less about.
Is that where you get McCain, who said he wouldn't vote for it in its current form, and then he still did vote for it?
Right.
Is that maybe that is where you get McCain to go no? Maybe. What about Jeff Flake?
Yeah, any state that's largely going to be hurt by the Medicaid stuff. It's.
What about Portman too? Portman and Capito would be others I would look at.
Those would be two more to look to. So yeah, I would expect the straight repeal.
Portman from Ohio, Capito from West Virginia.
Yep.
Then the following day is Thursday.
Yep.
And apparently they're going to keep debating and then finally open it up to amendments.
Yeah,
and have a voter-rama, which sounds really kind of exciting if you ask me.
This is something that's typical of large pieces of legislation. Same thing happened with the Affordable Care Act, where you have a number of amendments that are introduced by senators, and you basically do back-to-back votes. So you've got a slate of amendments that are up, and then you go from one to the next. So you have a series of roll call votes.
And anybody can introduce an amendment. So Tammy Baldwin can, as can.
No, and there's going to be a number of amendments introduced by Democrats aimed primarily at making the Republicans take some tough votes that could result in some very uncomfortable moments come campaign time next time for them. Because
let's hope we got to make them run the gauntlet.
Absolutely.
So and then they do the voter-rama, and then once what I wonder is. You said that there's a way they can limit the time spent on the voter-rama.
It's 20 hours of debate, so then...
Then that leads to the voter-rama.
Well, yeah, and then you have the vote on the amendments, and then once the votes on the amendments are completed, then it's basically the vote on the underlying legislation. Which at this point,
point you have had 2 vote downs.
Yeah, I mean, as we expect. I mean, the BCRA failed tonight, which was the repeal and replace. Tomorrow, we're expecting the straight repeal bill.
And everybody says they don't know what's going to happen, but let's be honest: the Democrats aren't going to get any of their things.
No, it's going to be.
They're going to lose every one of them.
We'll see. We'll see what some of these amendments look like. Maybe you peel off a few Republicans. I don't know.
I mean, on the other hand, does Portman get Democrats to go for his opioid Band-Aid, which is no small deal, but
right.
It's sort of like, okay, we're going to treat one problem well.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Or the other one, which is this Medicaid expansion Band-Aid, which really is a sham from what I've heard.
Yeah.
It's give people vouchers so they can purchase their own insurance.
Well, what I was going to...
Even though Medicaid is far more cost efficient than private insurance, there's less money being taken in for profits and so on and so forth.
One of the aggravating things that I think, listening to some critics on the right of Medicaid, is that I always hear this, they're not cutting funding for Medicaid, they're slowing the rate of growth for Medicaid. It's like, no, it's a cut. It is a cut because the amount of people that are on Medicaid every year continues to increase.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
And the cost of care continues to go up.
Right,
the cost of equipment that hospitals have to purchase goes up. So you can't just say we're going to slow. We're still giving them more money.
No, right.
It's a fucking cut
because
it's less per individual insured person.
And serious economists will say, if anything recently has slowed the rate of Medicaid growth, it's been Obamacare itself, because the cost of healthcare inflation writ large declined seriously under Obamacare, came way more into line with normal inflation.
Yeah.
CPI inflation was much higher. It was usually 6 to 8% a year, and it was down to 2 to 4% in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I think that's probably because of the rise in the insured, because you wind up with a better climate for preventative care, and then providers knew that they were more likely to receive payment for their services as well, so they didn't need to jack up the price on everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but I mean, so these are things that we need to think about. Is that what is said to be so inefficient may actually be the most efficient for a complex thing. And Obamacare, yes, a few people in individual markets. In some individual markets have seen spikes because the penalties for not joining aren't severe enough, frankly.
Right.
I mean, the true bipartisan reform should be to jack up the tax penalties for people that don't buy insurance. That would actually have the biggest impact on reducing rates in the individual market, because it would force everybody into them more effectively.
But they don't care
than
about
these
that.
Low fines.
They could care less.
These low taxes, basically.
Yeah. So
Friday morning, let's get to our end game here.
Yeah, so we're looking at what's being termed in the media.
By the time the gentle listener is tuning into our potting into our cast here,
yes,
we will probably be very close to this Friday morning.
Yeah,
we'll be near the conclusion of the Votorama, and
we'll be a few steps ahead
near this. And this is why we call this the skinny on healthcare repeal.
Yes.
The skinny on repeal.
So this is what's being coined in the media as the skinny repeal. So and that's really the bill that is going to get through here at the end of the day.
That's the end game on Friday morning.
Because what their goal is,
or sometime Friday,
right? Because they're expecting that they expected that the BCRA would fail, which it did tonight, and then they will expect that the repeal only will fail tomorrow. Or whenever
similarly
that vote occurs.
To the BCRA, right?
So then the next thing they will pursue is what's called a skinny repeal, and it's a bill that would only repeal the ACA's individual and employer mandates and the medical device tax. So it leaves Medicaid expansion in place, and then that passes, and then they go to conference with the House because, the Senate bill is different than what the House passed, so then you go to a conference committee, and then they hammer out the differences, and then both houses vote on the result that's reported out from that.
Right. And so the last part, I think we kind of bury the lead every time we talk, not just you, every time anybody has talked about this that I've heard from. Once skinny repeal passes, which on its own isn't that really that big of a deal, honestly.
Yeah.
What it does is allow this conference committee, which is completely secretive, to come up and hash out whatever they want, which we know is going to be similar to all the bills that have failed so far.
Right.
But give it actual momentum.
Yes.
And put real pressure on Republicans in both houses to pass it, and is guaranteed to be signed into law by President Trump, or if he's no longer president because of too many conflicts,
I think we can...
President Pence at the time. It's only a matter of weeks, really, because it would be tricky what they get in the conference committee. But whatever comes out of the conference committee, by the way, we're being told that no Democrats will really be invited to it. They'll be technically put on it, but they won't be invited to real meetings.
Yeah.
The meetings will be done almost entirely in secret. We'll probably be left with a bill that cuts essential services like childbirth, maternity care, that does all the damage much of the damage we're still talking about. Probably some pretty nice tax cuts for the wealthiest, and a whole lot less people with care, including people who might need it, or with ongoing therapies, which fall under Medicaid, like autism therapy or physical therapy for the elderly in long-term care situations, or long-term care itself.
That's what it's looking like. Is that the skinny repeal? Like I mentioned, it will keep the Medicaid expansion in place. And that's really as a means of getting the votes. So, like, somebody like Shelley Moore Capito can say,
I'll only do it just through the Senate.
That's what I'm saying.
It opens the door to gut the hell out of that stuff.
Right, but that's a few steps down the road. So,
except it's obvious that that's the next.
I know
that's the next place. Let's get to the end game. Let's stop worrying about process.
Well, but the senators are going to vote a certain way, are going to defend that vote by saying, well, I think we can do something better in conference. I voted for this thing because it defended Medicaid.
They're going to knowingly enable something terrible while saying that to the letter of the bill they voted for something that was better. But if Capito
or somebody else, Cotton, whoever, from a poorer state, votes for this thing, they can say in a press release or on Meet the Press, they can say, like, I voted for this thing because, it preserved Medicaid expansion. It's not going to hurt people in my state. Yeah,
I understand
let's get to conference. Let's get to conference and then see what see what we can do.
But then they're going to be bowled over what comes out of conference.
Right.
I mean, there's a chance that people will just finally say, well, we can't do what's in conference. But I don't think that's going to work, because we just saw what happened when push came to shove today.
Yes.
I think what will happen is you'll get the same result. You'll get that same 50 and the same 50. Plus, and then Pence will come in and take the deciding vote. He'll put the bill in his briefcase and bring it down Pennsylvania Avenue and put it on Trump's desk.
There you go.
And I think that's the danger we're facing here.
Yeah, so you definitely don't want
skinny repeal is a whole lot more. It has a whole lot more meat on it. Or there's a whole lot more of meat cleaving.
Well, you definitely don't want to wait until we have a conference report that's voted on in both houses, because at that point, it's if they both pass it, then it's out of the president's desk. It's not one of those things where it can go back and forth unless it's amended. It can.
So when the listener is hearing this today, or in real time, we will be probably within hours of the skinny repeal vote.
Probably.
So then the question is, what should someone do?
Well, keep the pressure on your senators.
At that point. Yeah, so I hope that there's going to be... I know that a lot of the resistance folks kind of thought they won last week, and I think they kind of took the week off.
Right.
Well, it's a bad time to take the week off. Every time we think we've won, every time they write or report the Democrat or the Republicans have lost, is a day those are the best days for those pushing repeal.
Right.
That's when they freaking twist their arms, they go back and hatch up their little things, and they feel like the pressure's off them and they can do anything they want.
Sure.
And that's why we're at where we're at, is that people thought they won. The resistance energy was lower this week, and they're passing it. There were reports out of Murkowski's office that most of the pressure coming in, frankly, is not from the left, it's now from the right.
Oh.
And that's where we're
That's
at,
a
what
problem.
we're up against. So I guess I would hope that the listeners would take a minute to call Senator Johnson, who's complaining about the process.
Yeah.
And say, you know what? Skinny repeal leads to a very closed process. You, Ron Johnson, probably won't be included in it. And even if you are, you're just part of the secrecy problem yourself.
Yeah.
And it is not an open process. The real solution is vote down skinny repeal and force any reform to be done through the normal order of the Senate, which, as Scott will explain for a second, it leads to bipartisanship. And why would that? Why does that?
Well, because so normally in normal times, I guess, for lack of a better word, normally you introduce a bill in committee. Or you introduce a bill in the Senate, it's referred to the committee that's relevant to that legislation, and then it's taken up by the committee chairman and the ranking member, and then there's a debate and there's an amendment process within the committee. Eventually, it's given an up and down vote within the committee. It either it succeeds or fails. If it's reported out, then the majority leader can schedule it on the Senate calendar. And then and then you have the motion to proceed on the legislation and amendment process on the floor, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So the sausage making, as it's been known, is it's not the prettiest process, but theoretically it should result in overall better legislation, or at least something that's more beneficial to the union as a whole, because senators from every state have the ability to, or congressional members for that matter, on the House side, have the ability to offer amendments to hopefully improve the thing.
Right. So I'm looking for a telephone number that one could call
to talk to their individual
to
senators.
Johnson. That's what I would do.
So here's some numbers for Senator Ron Johnson. When I worked for Senator Feingold, so the DC numbers were always the busiest ones, because a lot of things are routed through switchboards and
we want to jam those
parties
first so that people in his office feel like they're overwhelmed.
Absolutely, but if you're from Wisconsin and you wanna actually reach Ron Johnson, I think your better bet is calling the Milwaukee number, which is 414-276-7282, or you can call his Oshkosh office at 920-230-7250. And the DC number, if you want to try that as well, is 202-224-5323. The whole thing with the skinny repeal, too, is that, they're going to say it's an end game, or a way to get to the end game via the conference committee, but, shouldn't you be considering the consequences of the legislation as it stands? I mean, so the skinny repeal, being that it repeals the mandate, it repeals the medical device tax,
said, which isn't actually that bad, but it's pretty bad.
But but the bad thing is that it will destroy the individual insurance market, because the reason why we have the mandate is to get everybody in the pool. And so, much has been written about it, but
it would undermine it.
It would merits repeating.
It would take the tax penalties. So skinny repeal, even on its own, is a bad thing. I would suggest that it probably wouldn't be nearly as devastating as some of the other proposals, but it's not a good idea.
No, it's
not. Right.
Not if you want to keep the individual insurance market intact.
Right. Or as strong as it should be. Yeah. Right. Really what they ought to be doing is, They can call it whatever the hell they want. They don't have to call it a mandate or anything. Yeah. They can just call it a tax incentive program.
Sure.
What you do is you say everybody's tax rates are X unless you have health insurance, and then they're lower.
Yeah.
It's that simple. But the thing is, the tax penalty that people pay is probably too low under Obamacare. So skinny repeal goes the opposite direction.
Yeah. So if you're not from Wisconsin, I guess the last thing I would say is that the Capitol switchboard, the number is 202-224-3121. All right.
Forward,
folks.
Forward.